Say that again.
The youth pastor that raised me, that I was mentoring me, sexually abused his adopted children for years. And I was sitting there with this MS-13 member. And he goes, Nathan, the one thing I want to tell you is you're 10 steps away from murder. The Bible talks about the Pharisees walking around in long robes and wanting the respectful greetings in the marketplaces. You know, they come dressed as sheep, but inside they're ravenous wolves. And I just traveled the world, and I'd sit with there's one story in particular where I was in Mexico sitting at a convent, and the train that runs from the border to US is called El Tigre, and MS-13 runs it, and anybody from Central America would climb on top that want to get to the US border. And, MS-13 is raping kids, raping women, throwing women with new babies off. If they wouldn't let them have sex, they just chuck the baby off, kill people. And there was fees. And so I've talked to one girl who brought her cousin along, and she gave her cousin as payment to get her to the border. And so we were at this convent, and the convent, Catholic convent, will take anybody in, whether that be traveler or MS-13, anybody who's hurting. And so this is when I was like 22. I was shooting interviews, and I had a translator, and I was sitting there with this MS-13 member. And he goes, Nathan, the one thing I want to tell you is you're 10 steps away from murder. And I was like, what do you mean? And he goes, you will kill someone with 10 bad decisions. And he goes, I was raised on the streets in Hungary. MS-13 took me in. And he walked me through his life. And he goes, you are 10 steps away from murdering someone, 10 bad decisions. And that radically transformed how I look at whether that be sinners or, anybody I meet on this journey. And I'd rather sit with them because I know them. And so I came back, they're being honest with me, right? Oh yeah, you're going to kill me. Like if you're threatening to kill me, you're probably going to kill me. But a pastor in the US might smile at me as they're completely abusing the system, if that makes sense. And so I always say, because I shot on Warped Tour too, so I would shoot music videos on Warped Tour. And I'm like, I'd rather hang out with the punk rock guys who are doing drugs and just doing whatever they want, because that's what they sing about. But then I go into country music or into Christian music, and they sing about the greatest things. And then they're just complete POSs behind the scene. And so I'm like, I was just searching for truth, and I found God in these seminaries and churches in the slums. And then I'd come back to the US, and I'd stand in this $30 million a year church. And I'm like, you're not doing anything for your community, but you did build that new arena. You did buy that new sound system. And then at that same time, so everything's coming to a head and I'm getting frustrated. Two other things are happening in my life. That youth pastor I told you about was arrested for essaying his adopted children. He's still in.
Say that again.
The youth pastor that raised me, that I was mentoring me, sexually abused his adopted children for years. And so that news comes out, and he was being trained to take over this mega church at this point. And so he's in jail to this day. And I'm sitting here going, how is this pervert able to sit around children his whole life? And parents can look at this and be like, he's a pastor. They're safe with him. And he's sexually abusing his adopted children from Africa. And so that happens. My world travels are happening. And then my brother-in-law, the only pastor who would ever listen to my questions about how does the system work? Why does everybody say you get double honor? Why does everybody say you have the hardest job? And these are juvenile questions. I'm like 20. He's the only guy, he's about 10 years older than me, the only paid pastor that would field any of my questions. And he's a full-time pastor getting paid. And he has a disease called Huntington's. So it's a super rare genetic disease. And he's pretty far along now. But he was the one guy in the system who would listen. And so he'd come over and we'd sit and we'd drink whiskey on my little deck, and we would just talk theology for hours. And a couple years pass, and he calls me. He's like, hey, I finally understand what you mean. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? He goes, I quit my job today. And he's like, I got a job at Trader Joe's. And he goes, I preached my last sermon because I went back through Paul's letters, and I get it. He preached unencumbered of needing anything from the people he preached to, because he wanted to present Christ as Christ alone, with no institution or no demand behind him. So the one guy who inspired really inspired this whole journey, and this is the fucked up part of it, like he lost both his parents young. Like this guy had everything to be angry about. And instead, the one thing he wanted to present to the world was Christ. And I'm like, that's a man of God. And he's dying today, almost on his deathbed. And it's like, how did that guy get painted with so much baggage and crap? And then a person like me, who literally is just a train wreck wanting to kind of go out with a bang, God's for some reason keeping his hand over me. And so all these three storylines and experiences collided at once. And so at 25, I bought the religion business. So 16 years ago, I bought the domain. And I'm like, maybe I'll write a book one day. I don't know what I'm going to do with it. But that was the catalyst. And that's where I tasted righteous anger for the first time, not only for the institution, but for God. You know, I was like, why would you take so much from this guy who just gives to everybody? And that was the catalyst for the religion business.
Wow.
Yeah.
Man. So their whole world got flipped upside down when the pastor that mentored you got picked up for
that wasn't
sexual
that was
child.
more just like I knew it, you know.
You
like,
knew it?
Well, no, I'm
You
saying
had a-
like this is the good guys. All you know, the guys that look the best. You know, the Bible talks about the Pharisees walking around in long robes and wanting the respectful greetings in the marketplaces. You know, they come dressed as sheep, but inside they're ravenous wolves. You know, it's like, of course, the one person that everybody thought was, you know, this man of God is this ravenous wolf. And he's making good money. He is the picturesque ideal of the modern American pastor. And then the one who's being shunned and eventually just leaves the system, sounds like Todd a little bit, like gets a literal death sentence, you know. Mm-hmm. And yet he smiles in the face of death. And I don't know, it's a fascinating world, you know?
Yeah. No matter where you're watching Shawn Ryan Show from, if you get anything out of this, please like, comment, subscribe, and most importantly, share this everywhere you possibly can. And if you're feeling extra generous, please leave us a review on Apple and Spotify podcasts.